This is the time of year. So we're well into the growing season. So the cold nights, they are completely done. So we're no risk of frost. We're well past Memorial Day. So June, first part of July, is you will find at your garden centers the best selection, bar none, of perennial flowers. So these are plants that come back year after year. So perennials, so there's two types of perennials. Let me just go deeper into this. There's traditional perennials. That is, they hibernate underground. They need to rest through winter, and they insulate themselves underground at the root level. The top grows off. These are things like chrysanthemums. We've got echinaceas and gaillardias and coneflowers. There's a whole series. There's hundreds of them. Then there's more shrubby types of perennials. That is, they hibernate with their leaves off the plant. So these are things like lilacs. Okay, they don't die back underground. They just leave their foliage off because they're too tender, and they keep their stems or their branches in check. And so they come back from leaf buds forming on their branch structure. There's two types of perennials. Both are strong. Both come back year after year. But the ones that hibernate underground, these you have the best selection of perennials like this in the month of June. So your garden centers are just stocked up. And the reason being, they're coming back from the roots. They take longer to grow than, let's say, an annual does. An annual is one that just looks great for a year, then dies in the winter. It lives 1 year. Annuals live 1 year, and then they're done. Perennials and permanent, they both come back with peas. So they come back year after year. And so the perennials, we start those last year. We let them go dormant. They hibernate underground for the winter at the farm. Then they're coming back the second year. So these are typically 2-year-old plants, but they don't look very good. They look like wildflowers. I mean, there's foliage, but no flowers. So they take longer to become full, luscious, and blooming. June is their time to really show off. So you'll see more varieties of perennials this time of year than you would, let's say, annuals. Annuals, you have more selection in March, April, first part of May. Now, as we get into closer and closer to summer, you get the perennials. They really show off. And these are the big ones. So you've got big hydrangeas. This is a glorious perennial, huge flowers. But I wish I could get them to bloom in April. I could sell a ton of them. They're just later. They bloom later. They're a summer bloomer. There's just no way to force them. And so echinaceas, gaillardias, there's more varieties of native yarrows now. So the yellow one we've had for a while. We've had the whites, but now we've got the reds and the paprikas and these different exotic colors. And they're all equally as hardy, but we've just got more selection now because they've flushed out and look better. That's also another reason why perennials typically, not every time, but typically are a little bit more expensive. That's because they're at the farm for 3-4 times as long. I mean, some of the peonies, they can be at the farm for 10 years. This is a 10-year-old plant. So they're going to cost, you got to care for it for 10 years before you bring it to the garden center and have it bloom with these flowers of the size of your hand, fragrance, colors you've never seen before. And so they're going to be more expensive. Perennials are at least 2 years old or older, whereas an annual flower, that is petunias and calibrachoa, marigolds, pansies, these things, they take typically 6 weeks. That's why your box stores, they mainly focus on annuals. You don't find very many perennials there. Perennial herbs, perennial flowers, perennials, because they take so long. The financial metrics just don't make, they need turns per square foot. There's some retail terms, but they're looking at the math. They only care about the money. And so they want to turn those benches as fast as they can. Well, annuals, that's how you do it. Perennials takes really a garden center. Someone that, it takes a plant nerd who's going to invest like 10 years of their life for some Ito peony to grow it. That's going to be someone that's freakishly into plants who just wants to see if they can do it. And so that's why the perennial, your garden centers, your independent garden centers, ones that are owned by plant nerds, they're the ones that are going to have the big selection of perennials. And this is the time when they're virtually all of them are in bloom. They're inspiring. You've got more color choices, more fragrant choices, more heights, more styles. So Penstemon, a native flower that grows wild. It's truly a wild flower. You plant one, you're never going to have just one. You're going to have them. That root's going to come back year after year, bigger and bolder. Plus, it's going to reseed and spread throughout the yard. In spring, early spring, I've got them. Yeah, you can be inspired by the buds. They aren't in bloom quite yet, but you see the flowers that are going to bloom. You see the tag, the size of I don't know, small. You can kind of see the color, but now they're all in bloom. And I've got so many more colors to choose from. So it's more than just the red one you see in wild or that white one. We've got pinks and variegations and different heights. You've got a lot of wildflowers to pick from now. Salvia gregii. This is autumn sage. Autumn sage is an early bloomer. So it's a perennial, comes back year after year, typically from the branches. But in spring, I'll typically have red. That's the number one seller. So you start with reds and then you build up or crescendo, or as perennial season expands, this is the time. Now you get pinks, you get a red. I've got one called lipstick. It's a red flower. It's actually a white flower, and it looks like garden fairies have painted red lipstick on the very end of the flower. Very unique. The hummingbirds just they freak out. They just love this plant. They love lipstick. But I've also got a purple and an apricot. And this is when you see more varieties and more sizes showing up. And so early in spring, I try to force the buyers. We try to only have the larger sizes, the larger root ball sizes, because they're hardier. They're going to be more likely to thrive and survive a cold, freakish last storm that shows up. As we get into the season, and there's less mistakes to be made, nature is kinder. Now we bring in more sizes for the plant variety. So more 1 gallons, more 2 gallons, more variety of sizes. So some of that strategic. So Waters Garden Center, we're noted as the place where our plants live, not just live, but they thrive. So if the plant thrives, so we're trying to bring in the varieties and the sizes at the right season. So your success rate, the local gardeners that shop here on this side of Prescott, they have more success. It's a strategy, but that's a reason why. We're also infusing the water with mycorrhizal colonies. So we're adding beneficials that help the plant root out, because we know when you take it home, you're not going to have that. Your contractor scraped off every living thing that was in your yard, and you're left with, many of you, sterile soil. So we're trying to encourage you to add some compost, some mulch back into that. So add some organics, and then we're infusing the root balls with mycorrhizal, some beneficial things that help the plants to root out. So we can supercharge your soil when you put this plant in the garden at your yard. It's going to actually not just help the plant grow, it's going to help your gardens to grow. The strategies. We're using the organic seaweed fertilizer, because seaweed is like magic for making plants green and full and big flower buds. So you'll have more flowers on that perennial flower. It shows them off better here at the garden center because we want them to be inspirational. But it's going to keep juicing that plant when you take it home and help it to root out into your garden. So it's a strategy. But the reason that you're seeing more perennials now than you did even in the spring season, when summer solstice is right around the corner. And so it's the growing season. The reason you see more of them is because they're finally up from the ground, they're up rooted, and now they've had time to set their flowers. And if you deadhead, pinch off that spent flower on, let's say, coneflower, that thing will keep blooming for months. It's amazing how long you can keep a perennial blooming. Anyway, that's why June, first part of July, is perennial. It's almost a separate season just for gardeners. All right, back at you in just a moment. Right back.